What's up guys, Paulo Valle here. So today we're talking about cameras. Whether you want to switch cameras or buy your first camera, this video is for you. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you guys to follow me on Instagram at Paulo Del Valle. Lots of beautiful travel photos there. I'm sure you're gonna love it. The link's in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In 2018, I'm gonna focus on YouTube, so I'm gonna teach you guys how to take amazing photos on your smartphone, camera, and drone. So make sure to subscribe. So I analyze a lot of cameras to narrow it down to just a few to bring you guys just the best. If your camera isn't here, or if the camera you're thinking about buying isn't here, that doesn't mean that it's not good. It's just my opinion. The cameras, I think they're best, so keep that in mind. And of course, the year is just starting, so the camera manufacturers will start to update their cameras. So maybe some of the cameras I talked about here may be updated, so it's good to check it out on the manufacturer's website to see if they updated the camera. If they did, it's probably better than the one I talked here, so make sure to check that out. Also, this may be a bit of a long video because it's a lot of cameras, so I'll try to talk as fast as possible so it's not longer than I expected, but let's get started. So I split this video in 4 parts. First, for beginners, so it's cameras for those that they don't have a camera, they want to buy their first camera. For amateurs or entry-level cameras, those that are amateur photographers, maybe they already have an entry-level camera, they want to update it. Also semi-professionals, those who love taking photos that go a little bit deeper into photography, or maybe that you already work with it. And of course, professional cameras, they are meant just for professional, they're more expensive, they're amazing. So the camera I recommend for beginners is the Nikon D3400. It's a very nice camera, especially if you're getting started into photography, or if you never had a camera before. Maybe you don't know if you're gonna like it, or maybe you won't get too much into photography. So you should get a budget camera, a camera that's not very expensive, and also it's good. And this camera it's very nice. It's 24 megapixels. It shoots movies in full HD up to 60 frames per second. Of course, those who are beginners, that they don't understand very much about it, but in post-production, using software for editing, you can create slow motion. You can control the camera with your smartphone using it as a remote. It has a very cool feature called Guide that helps you get the perfect shot even if you don't know much about photography. So it's very cool. It's very cheap. You can get it for $397. And also there's a kit with another lens, a telephoto lens, that's just a little bit more expensive. It's totally worth it. With the kit with 2 lenses, you get the price of a similar Canon. So it's a very good camera if you're getting started. I totally recommend you getting the Nikon D3400. Now let's talk about cameras for amateur photographers or entry-level cameras. And my favorite is the Canon T7i. It's a great camera. It's 24 megapixels. It shoots full HD videos up to 60 frames per second, so you can do a nice slow motion in post-production. It shoots 6 frames per second, so if you're shooting sports, it's a nice camera. 6 photos per second is pretty good. It has 45 focus points, which is nice, and if you're shooting movement, that's important. It has a touch screen, so you can touch the focus. It has an articulated screen, so you can like put the screen to yourself. It helps you to take selfies, especially if you like doing vlog. You can put the screen to yourself to see what you're recording. And one thing that's very nice about the Canon T7i is that it focuses while it records movies, so that's very good for vlogging as well. Another very cool thing it records time-lapse inside cameras. Not many cameras do that nowadays. And it has a pretty good battery life. You can take 600 photos with a single battery. And it has Wi-Fi, so you can control your cameras with your camera with your smartphone using the Canon app, either for iPhone and Android. The Canon 7i costs about $799, and it's a very good camera. It's my favorite one among these three entry-level cameras we're gonna talk about. The second one is the Sony A6000, the Alpha. Also a very good camera. It's very compact. It's almost like half the weight as the Canon T7i. It's pretty small, so if you're looking for something very compact that you can put in a purse and it's easy to carry around, the Sony is the choice for you. It has 24 megapixels, it shoots Full HD as well, up to 60 frames per second. You can do slow motion in post-production. It has a crazy 179 focus points, and it shoots 11 frames per second, so 11 photos per second, and 179 focus points. Great for taking photos of sports and movement. So if you're into that, the Sony is the choice for you as well. It's also the cheapest camera between the three of them. It's now about $498, so $500 for a very good camera. The only problem is that the Sony, it's almost on the 4th generation on the 6000 series. Now it has the 6500, the 6300, so the 6000 is getting a little bit old, but still very good between its competitors. So it's a very good camera as well. And my third choice, the Nikon D5600. Also basically the same thing, 24 megapixels, shoots Full HD, 60 frames per second, so you can do slow motion. It has Wi-Fi, so you can control with your smartphone as a remote. It has a good battery life, 800 photos. Make time lapses inside the camera as well. It also has a touch screen, so you can touch the focus. Basically the same thing as the Canon T7i, and it costs about $747 on B&H. So it's a very nice camera. It's cheaper than the Canon, so it's a matter of taste. And these cameras, they're very similar to each other, as I said. You see that later in the video. I'm gonna talk about semi-professionals, professional cameras, and I'm gonna divide for very specific types of use, like landscape, event, wedding photography, that kind of stuff. So I'm not doing these with these cameras, these entry-level cameras, because they're basically the same thing for everything. They have the same video features, the same photo features. So it's a matter of taste. Maybe you already have an entry-level camera like a Canon T3i and you want to update it to the T7i, because when you change system, it's very hard because maybe you have lenses and you have to sell them. So it's easier to change to the same system. So if you don't have any camera and you want to get one of these, it's just a matter of taste. Maybe you heard from a friend that Sony's better, or Canon's better, Nikon's better. It's just a matter of taste. But between these three, of course, the Sony is lighter and cheaper, and the other ones are bigger. They feel more like a camera, a professional camera. It's just a matter of taste. Now let's talk about the semi-pro cameras. The cameras I bring you here is the Canon 6D Mark II, the Sony A6500, the Nikon D500, and the Fujifilm X-T2. Among these, the Canon 6D is my favorite one. I have the first Canon 6D. I love this camera. It's a full frame camera. A lot of people think that just because the 6D is a full frame camera, it means that it's a professional camera. I don't think that's true. You can't compare a Canon 6D to a 5D Mark IV or a Canon 1DX Mark II. Those are professional cameras, really amazing cameras. I think the Canon 6D is a semi-professional camera. So Canon just updated the 6D this past year to the Mark II, and some people were really sad about the update because they didn't bring 4K for video, but it's still a good camera, and it's a 26 megapixel camera. It records Full HD video up to 60 frames per second, so you can do a nice slow motion in post-production. It has Wi-Fi. You can control your camera with your smartphone. It has 45 focus points, which is not very good. It's the same thing as the Canon T7i, and it shoots 6.5 frames per second. Also not the best camera for sports and movement. But now the screen is articulated and it has a very good dual pixel focusing system. which is it. So now it focuses while recording movie, and so you can articulate the screen and put the screen for you. So it's a good camera for vlogging. So it will be focusing while you're filming. It has a very long battery life, so it can take up to 1200 photos with a single battery, which is great, especially if you shoot events, weddings, that kind of stuff. And now it has it shoots time lapse inside the camera, so that's very good. So the Canon 6D is costing now about $1,700, just the body with no lenses, different from the entry-level cameras that comes with the kit with the lens. We usually get these semi-pro and professional cameras, just the body, and then we get the lens for the type of photography we shoot. So this is the price just for the body, $1,700. The second camera I bring here is the Sony A6500. I really like the Sony A6500, especially for video. It's also great for a great camera for photography. It has a 24 megapixel sensor. It's not full frame, but it has crazy 425 focus points and shoots 11 frames per second. So it's a very good camera for sports and movement. And it has a crazy shutter speed of 32,000 of a second. So really amazing. It's a really compact camera. So if you're looking for a compact camera, definitely go with the Sony. It's half the weight as a Canon 6D. The screen also articulates, but not just as, not as good as the Canon that you can put it yourself. It's just like up and down. But it shoots 4K, 30 frames per second, and it shoots crazy 120 frames per second in Full HD, so you can do amazing slow motion in post-production. So if you shoot video, the Sony is the perfect camera for you. The Sony is costing about $1,200 if I'm not mistaken. With the lens, it's a very thin lens, not a very good one. So if you work with photography, I recommend you getting another lens, a better one. But it's the cheaper camera among these 4 semi-pro cameras. And the third camera is the Nikon D500. I was really surprised when I found this camera. I didn't know about it, and when I found it, I thought the specs were really good. So that's why I'm bringing you here as the best semi-pro camera from Nikon. The only downside, has a 21 megapixel sensor. It's also a cropped sensor, APS-C. But it's a very good camera. It has 153 focus points, and it shoots 10 frames per second, so it's a good camera for sports and shooting movement. It shoots 4K at 30 frames per second and Full HD up to 60 frames per second. It has Wi-Fi, it has the articulated screen, it focuses while filming, all that stuff. One thing that I think is awesome, it has 2 storage slots, so you can use 2 SD cards at once, so you can maybe put one to take photos and the other one to record video, or if you fill one up, you can start filling the other one up, so that's very good. The Nikon D500 costs about $1,800, just the body, so almost the same price as the Canon 6D Mark II. So it really depends on the system you want to use. Maybe you already have a Nikon, you want to upgrade it. If you have a Canon, want to upgrade it, already have lenses, so I recommend you stay in the same system unless you really want to change. And last but not least, the Fujifilm X-T2, also great camera from Fuji, 24 megapixel sensor. It shoots crazy 14 frames per second. It has 325 focus points, so amazing camera for shooting sports and movement. It shoots 4K video up to 30 frames per second, so that's very good. It has Wi-Fi, so you can control your camera with your smartphone. It also does a crazy shutter speed of 32,000 of a second, just like the Sony A6500, and it's a very compact camera, just like the Sony. If you're looking for a compact camera, also consider this Fujifilm, and the lenses from Fuji are very cheap, so that's very good as well, and the lenses from Sony are very expensive, so that's something to consider. The Fuji X-T2 costs about $1,500, just the body, but the lenses from Fuji are very cheap, so it's a very good option as well. So if you shoot architecture, interior photography, I recommend you buying the Canon 6D because it's a full frame camera, it's a full frame sensor, so it captures more of the environment you're shooting. So I definitely recommend you getting the 6D for architecture and interior photography. If you do landscape, also I believe the Canon 6D would be the best choice because it has more detail. It has 26 megapixels, which is more than the other ones. If you shoot portraits, I believe the Canon 6D would be the best choice as well. More detail, amazing full frame sensor. If you like to shoot movement sports, either the Nikon D500, the Fujifilm X-T2 or the Sony A6500, those are great. A lot of frames per second, a lot of focus points. Definitely not the 6D for that, because it's just a 6 frames per second is just not very good. If you shoot events and wedding, definitely go with the Canon 6D Mark II. Because it's a full frame camera, it has bigger pixels, so it handles better the ISO in low light situations, and also has a great battery life. So you can, if you have 2-3 batteries, you can take thousands of photos. Different from Sony, because Sony can only take less than 400 photos with a single battery, which is ridiculous. So if you shoot events and wedding, definitely go with the 6D. I would recommend for street photography and daily life photography the compact cameras, such as the Sony and the Fujifilm. Since they're compact, they don't bring much attention, so those are great for street photography and just daily life. They're very compact, you can put it in a purse, it's easy to carry around. And for video, if you work with video, definitely go with the Sony A6500 because it shoots 4K, it has image stabilization and the sensor, which is great 5-axis stabilization, and also shoots amazing 120 frames per second in Full HD, which gives you an amazing slow motion in post-production. Those were the SemiPro cameras. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me in the comments. Now let's talk about the professional cameras. Of course, these are amazing cameras. They're all full frame. They're even more expensive. They're meant for professionals. And I'll start with the brand new Sony A7R Mark III. Sony just released this camera a couple of months ago, and it was reviewed as the best camera of 2017. I shoot with the Sony A7R Mark II, and I absolutely love it. I can't wait to get my hands on the new Sony A7R III. And the sensor is practically the same as the A7R II. It has a 42 megapixel sensor, has 425 focus points, and now it shoots 10 frames per second, so it's a much better camera for shooting movement and sports. Now it has a touchscreen. It shoots 4K 30 frames per second and 120 frames per second in Full HD. What I love about Sony, it has image stabilization, 5-axis image stabilization in the sensor, which is great for video. It now has 2 storage slots for SD cards, which is great as well. So, and it has a much better battery life now, almost double. Now you can take up to 650 photos with a single battery, but still not very good, Sony. You need to improve that. And the Sony A7R III, it costs about $3,200, just the body. And unfortunately, Sony lenses are pretty expensive, but I love Sony. I really like what they've been doing with their cameras, and I really recommend it to everyone. And also a very good professional camera is the brand new Nikon D850, 850, whatever you want to call it. It has a crazy 46 megapixel sensor, even better than the Sony A7R III, A7R II, and 153 focus points, and shoots 7 frames per second. Not the best camera for movement or sports, but it shoots crazy 8K time-lapse. Of course, also 4K time-lapse. But shooting 8K time-lapse, it makes absolutely the best camera for landscape photographers, because it's really cool to do landscape time-lapses. It shoots 4K up to 30 frames per second, has articulating screen, touch screen, all the good stuff, 2 storage slots, very good as well. It's $100 more than the Sony A7R III. It's costing about $3,300. And then we have the Canon 5D Mark II. Has 30 megapixel sensor, full frame, only 61 focus points. It shoots only 7 frames per second. So also not the best camera for shooting sports or movement. And it shoots 4K. One of the few cameras from Canon that shoots 4K, but only 30 frames per second. Also 2 storage slots. It has a nice battery life of up to 900 photos with a single battery. So very good camera from Canon. It's not because it's my third choice that it's a bad camera, and if you already have Canon, of course I would recommend you stay in the same system if you have many lenses. For me, I changed from Canon to Sony, and I already had a lot of Canon lenses, and I changed anyway. So I just bought a mounted adapter, and I can still use my Canon lenses on my Sony, which is great. So it really depends what you're looking for. So the Sony 5D Mark IV, it's the same price as the A7R III. It costs about $3,200. Very good camera as well. And also, talking about professional cameras, there are 2 other cameras that are a bit more expensive, and there's a very specific use for them. They're meant for shooting sports photography, like if you're a photographer, shoot sports, you go shoot the Olympics and stuff like that. These cameras are great, which is the Sony Alpha 9, the A9, and the Canon 1DX Mark II. The Sony A9, it's a 24 megapixel camera. It has 693 focus points and shoots 20 frames per second with no blackout in the screen. It's crazy. It's definitely the best camera for shooting sports. The focus is super fast. It shoots 4K just like the A7R III. 4K 30 frames per second or Full HD 120 frames per second. It has articulating screen, it has stabilization in the sensor, so very good for video, just like all the other Sonys. It's a really fast camera. 2 storage slots, all the good stuff, and it's costing about $4,500. It's a pretty expensive camera, but the Canon one's even more expensive. The 1DX Mark II costs about $5,500. It's $1,000 more, but of course it's a very good camera, but it's huge. It's a huge camera. If you take a look at it, it's almost double the size as the A9. It's double the weight. It's crazy big, but it's 20 megapixel sensor. It has only 61 focus points. It does a very good 16 frames per second, so of course amazing camera for shooting sports. Has a great battery life of 1200 photos with a single battery, and the Sony A9 has the same battery as the A7R III, which shoots up to 650 photos with a single battery. One very good point about the 1DX Mark II that it shoots 4K 60 frames per second. One of the very few cameras on the market that does that. So if you're looking for a camera that does 4K 60 frames per second so you can have slow motion, go to Canon, but keep in mind that it's a huge camera. It's very heavy. It's not every Steadicam or gimbal that can handle this camera for image stabilization. Keep that in mind. But of course, it's a very good camera and costing about $5,500. It's very expensive. Of course, just the body. So if you shoot landscape, definitely go with the Nikon D850 because 46 megapixels and it does 8K time-lapse videos, which is amazing. But of course, the A7R III and A7R II is very good for landscape as well. If you shoot portraits or events, weddings, definitely go with the Nikon as well because 46 megapixels and it does crazy 1800 photos with a single battery. Can you believe that? It's almost 3 times as the battery from Sony and almost double as the battery from Canon. So amazing battery if you shoot events, weddings, portraits, all that kind of stuff. it's an amazing battery. You can go all day shooting. If you do sports, of course, shoot a lot of movement, definitely go with the Sony A9. Amazing camera for that, 20 frames per second, 693 focus points. Or the Canon 1DX Mark II, the huge Canon. If you do street photography, the A7R III or A7R II is the most compact one. So if you get a small lens, it's a small one. And if you do video, I guess the best one would be the A7R III that does 4K 30 frames per second, or the A9. It's just like much more expensive, where if you're looking for 4K 60 frames per second, go with the 1DX Mark II, but keep in mind that's huge. Alright guys, that's it. I hope you guys liked it. I hope I helped you guys somehow choosing your next camera, if you're switching cameras, if you're buying your first camera. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. I'm gonna reply everyone. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Paulo del Valle, and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more photography videos from now on. And of course, if you like this video, hit the like button. And that's it. I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.